Welcome to the Ronel Talks Money show. Now, today we are going to talk about a very relevant topic, and even more so during this post-COVID or post-lockdown period, and that would be debt management. Now, I want to just quickly tell you that we are going to do a giveaway of my book, Financially Fit and Wealthy Again. So if you want to get a book, make sure that you subscribe to the channel, that you like, that you share this video, and that you comment. Tell us what did you find valuable, any questions that you might have, and then you might get a free book. But today I have a special guest with me, Neil Roets. Now, Neil is the founder of Debt Rescue, and Debt Rescue is registered with the National Credit Regulator. They are ranked as the #1 debt counseling company in South Africa, and they have received multiple awards over the years. So Neil, welcome, and thanks a lot for joining me.
Hi, Ronel. Thank you very much for having me. And yeah, like you said, it's really difficult times, and this is a very relevant topic. So I really hope that we can help and educate the people around this very important topic.
Absolutely. Now, Neil, I think before we get into the questions, maybe you can just briefly tell us a little bit more about Debt Rescue. What is it all about? What do you do?
Yes, so we founded Debt Rescue in 2008, and that was just after the implementation of the National Credit Act, which was in 2007. And what debt counseling is all about, and that's the services that Debt Rescue renders, is that it helps people who are over indebted to pay back their debt in an affordable manner without losing their assets. Yes, and coming back to Debt Rescue itself, so we founded it in 2008, and in the beginning, because it's this whole process was done in terms of new legislation, there were a lot of teething problems in the beginning, and a lot of communication between us as debt counselors and the banks or credit providers. And over the years, we have really streamlined the process of debt counseling. And as a result of that, we're working very well together with the banks and all other credit providers. And we've managed to help people, thousands of people, to pay off their debt in an affordable manner, and in the process, also protecting their assets.
Okay, that's absolutely amazing. And it's so good to know that there are professional people out there who can actually help people during these difficult times. But I think, like, since we are talking about the difficult times, you guys are obviously close to this. You are working with this every day, and considering kind of the stats and the trends that you are seeing, how would you say, how did the situation change if you think about pre-lockdown to what you are seeing post-lockdown?
So what we've seen pre-lockdown with regards to over-indebtedness and debt counseling as a solution was that the situation was already bad in the sense that almost half of all credit active consumers were behind on at least 3 months on one of their accounts. So that means that the country was already in a difficult situation financially. But then what happened during COVID is that obviously a lot of people did not receive their incomes during that time. But then with regards to debt counseling, a lot of people sat back and did not do anything to improve their situation, because they were under the impression that somebody will come to them and help them in the form of the banks, who will give these payment holidays and perhaps write off debt or interest. And a lot of people also were under the impression that government might step in and help everybody. But the reality is that that did not happen. It happened to some extent. We saw some payment holidays implemented, and that helped people to some extent, and government did help some businesses and some people, but not everybody benefited from this. So then during the COVID period, not a lot of people applied for debt review because they were sitting back and waiting for somebody to come and help them. But now that people are realizing that the reality is that nobody's just going to come and help you, you have to take that responsibility on yourself and make those decisions that's necessary to help you and your family. Now we're seeing people coming to us for help, a lot more people coming to us for help. And the situation is just very bad with regards to the people's finances out there, because so many people have lost their jobs as a result of the lockdown or this whole COVID pandemic. I think the number is around 3 million people who's lost their jobs. Now that is terrible. And I mean, if you just think about it, if 3 million people lost their jobs, how many families, that means that 3 million families probably are impacted by this, and even more people. So the situation is really, really bad, and COVID and lockdown made it even worse. The sad reality is that I don't think that's the end of it. In fact, I'm very positive that the situation is just going to get worse as we move into next year. I think the situation is going to be worse because of the fact that a lot of people had money saved up, or they benefited from these payment holidays, or they had people or family where they were able to borrow money from, but that has now run out. And the reality is also that the credit providers are going to come back next year and start with aggressive collection of their money.
Yeah, now I think like we all know that it is bad, but I think we cannot always really calculate kind of the extent, exactly how bad is it and how bad is it going to play out in future. So that is really a very difficult time. And I think, there already, I think we have a couple of new things that were almost kind of forced on people, why people end up in having too much debt. But if we now almost take the lockdown period out of the picture, in general, what would you say, what are the reasons or the root causes? Why do people end up in having too much debt?
Well, I would say, and that's a very good question, I would say that the main reason is the lack of financial literacy. If you think about it, when in our school system, or even the tertiary educational system, nowhere does people or do you get educated around how to work with money, how to draw up a budget, how to stick to a budget, which debt to take on and which not to take on, what is good debt, what is bad debt, how does all these things work. We don't see that. And I think it's as a result of that people are so vulnerable. And that's why, and that brings us to the second factor, and that is credit providers enticing people to take up debt, to buy things that they do not really need. So let's take a person who's now finished school, for instance, or perhaps tertiary education. Now they're entering the job market. All of a sudden, they're getting an income, a monthly income that they never received before. And all of a sudden, they're approached by credit providers offering this lump sum of money that they did not even ask for. And they feel like it must be Christmas because these people are giving me this money. And obviously they're going to say yes and take that and spend that money. But they do not always realize that that money has to be paid back, and it's going to be paid back with lots of interest. And people do not really plan for that. And then also one of the other factors that's quite important is the fact that, we like to keep up with the Joneses, so to speak. And we feel like we have to buy the biggest house possible, or rent the biggest house possible, or buy the biggest car possible that we can, because that's what our family and friends are doing, and we have to keep up with them. And it's a funny thing, you know, we're struggling in South Africa with our finances. It's really not going well with the public out there with regards to the finances. But still, if it comes to cars, for instance, and you compare that with let's say, first world countries, we are much more obsessive with cars to prove your status than any other country who don't even need that. So, and that all boils down to the lack of financial education and literacy. So I think there's really a need for financial education in South Africa.
No, I totally agree with you. And I think the one point that you mentioned is that people kind of, quite often they wait until it is too late. And then, you know, you struggle a lot more to really help them. While if they could have, you know, like try to look for help or look for alternatives much earlier on in the process, it could have been a lot easier. And I find that with my clients as well. You know, they almost kind of, like you said at the beginning, they sit back and hope that something will change, and that is often not going to happen, or should I rather say that's never going to happen. You need to take the responsibility and you need to educate yourself. But what would you say, kind of like at what stage should somebody kind of start looking for help in terms of indebtedness? Would it be kind of at a certain point, or is there a percentage that people can look at, or how do you really determine that?
Yes, well, before we get to that, I just want to add to your point that you made earlier on, and that is that unfortunately people usually wait too long before they ask for help, and South Africans are so fortunate in the sense that we have brilliant legislation in helping people in this regard, but we know that in South Africa, especially men, when it comes to money, you don't necessarily want to admit that you cannot get out with your money as it is, and you're going to see yourself as a failure. So unfortunately, what we see is that people try all avenues and to try and get out of this debt trap themselves before they ask for help. So then coming to your question, and that is, when should a person ask for help and approach a debt counselor? Well, that's easy. As soon as you find yourself in a situation where you're not able to pay for all your living expenses and your credit providers on a monthly basis, you should immediately approach a debt counselor, because that would mean that you are over indebted in the sense that your income is starting to become less than your expenses. Now, what we've learned over the years is that once you are in that debt trap, you can't get out by yourself, or it's at least very, very difficult to get out by yourself. So people try to do that for a couple of months or years before they ask for help. They feel that if they can just get one or two more loans, means that they can pay a couple of these installments that the people are asking for, and then they will be okay. But you have to pay that loan as well. And that's not, the bottom line is you cannot borrow yourself out of debt. That's the reality. And unfortunately, people do not always want to admit that they in this problem. They do now have these financial difficulties and they need help. So they try and get out by themselves. And so the short answer is, as soon as you find yourself in a situation where you cannot pay all your expenses, even 1 month, approach a debt counselor. If what sometimes happens is that in the rare occasion that somebody approaches us in a very, very early stage, we also help people just to do or set up their budget for them and tell them that you are not really over indebted. if we just change this a little bit, you are going to get out with your money. So it's not then even, it's not necessary to put them under debt review in those circumstances, but rather come earlier, because then there's always more that we can do for you.
No, absolutely. I agree with that. But I think you should maybe just explain to us in layman's terms the concepts of debt review and debt counselling.
So yes, just to start off with debt counselling and debt review, it's actually the same thing, debt counselling and debt review. And then talking about debt counselling, counselling really sounds like people are coming to our office, lying on this nice couch, and we're going to start chatting with them and make them feel better about their life and their finances. That's definitely not the case. Debt counselling is actually a legal process. And we act in terms of the National Credit Act. And what the process entails is that we look at all your income, and then we also look at all your expenses. And if your expenses on a monthly basis is more than your income, it means that you are over indebted, and then you qualify for debt review or debt counseling. What we do then is we look at your payments towards your credit providers, and we reduce these payments to such an extent on a monthly basis that you would have enough money to pay back your credit providers, but also have enough money to pay for all your living expenses. Now, the way we do this and how we are able to do this is we extend the period in which you pay back that debt. So yes, you're going to pay off longer on those credit agreements, but at least it would put you in a situation now where you can afford to pay back your debt towards your credit providers and have enough money to pay for all your living expenses, like, for instance, your school fees, your clothes, your rent, your insurance, and all these kind of things. And then on top of that, we take this new repayment plan of yours and we apply at court to make this an order of court. And the reason why we do that is to make sure that we offer you the most protection that you can get in terms of the National Credit Act. So this new repayment plan that we're going to give you, a credit provider cannot now come to you and approach you and say, we're not happy with this, we're going to sue you. That's not how it works, because now you enjoy the protection of the National Credit Act. And on top of that, you also enjoy the protection of the court order that we gained on your behalf.
Yeah, and I think that already explains everything, kind of why it is so important to rather follow these processes. It is available to help and assist you to, like, get out of debt and to live like in a better lifestyle. But I think if we also think about a debt consolidation, how is debt review different from debt consolidation?
Well, there's actually a huge difference between debt counseling and debt consolidation, because yes, we've just explained debt counseling now. It's not giving you any further loans or anything like that. It's a matter of us negotiating with your credit providers on your behalf and in terms of this legislation, and obtaining a court order which will make sure that you enjoy that protection. Now, with regards to debt consolidation, that is just another loan. It's as simple as that. But the idea of that loan is to have this one loan, consolidate all your debt into that loan, and pay off all your current credit providers. And the idea is also that might save you money, because your interest rate on the consolidation loan might be lower than what you're currently paying. But the reality is that is not always, it's rarely enough to get you out of debt or to relieve your situation and your problem that you have. Because if you think about it, the only place where you can possibly save money is just on the interest rate. So there's no way that can make a difference big enough to get yourself out of financial difficulties. It at most, how we see it, is just a matter of convenience, because of, instead of paying 10 credit providers, you're now just paying one. So it's very convenient, but it's definitely not going to get you out of debt and help you if you're in a difficult financial situation. Another thing also is that usually, or if you want to use a consolidation loan to get you out of your difficult financial problems, it also doesn't really make sense, because if you're in financial difficulties, chances are very good that you would have defaults on some of your accounts. Now, if you have defaults, in terms of the National Credit Act, you're not allowed to get any more debt. So it's very difficult to get these consolidations loans. So that's not really a solution in our opinion.
Now I hear you. And then if somebody now has to come to you and say, I need a debt review process, maybe you can just take us through the process. How will it really plays out?
Yeah, what is important to realize is that you do not have to come into our offices at all. We work on a national basis, but it's very convenient. So what would happen is you contact our offices or you go onto our website and fill in a contact form, and we will contact you. We will then explain the whole process to you and then ask you to fill in a form which will set out your income and also all of your expenses. On top of that, we will do a credit search so that we can make sure we have all your expenses, because sometimes people forget about loans that they might have and still supposed to be paying off. So we make sure that we have all your expenses in front of us and all your income. And then we contact the credit providers and we notify them that this person is now under debt review. And this notification that we're giving them is a formal notification in terms of the National Credit Act. So from that point onwards, you would immediately enjoy the protection of the National Credit Act. And from that point onwards, credit providers would not be allowed to take legal action against you. So you would immediately start to enjoy that protection. And then we start working on your budget, and we look at how much can you afford to pay back your credit providers. We do a whole new repayment plan, and we also ask the credit providers for a certificate of balance to make sure that we know exactly how much is outstanding with all the credit providers. Then in this repayment plan that we work out, we send it to you, we ask you whether you're happy with that or not. If you're happy, we send it out to all the credit providers and tell them that this is now the new repayment plan. So instead of now getting your full installment, for instance, now you're only going to get 50% of your installment. And that's also to get back to the debt consolidation and debt review part. Debt consolidation doesn't offer that much relief, whereas with debt counseling, we can reduce the monthly installment up to 60%, which is enormous. But anyway, so getting back to the process, we then notify the credit providers that this is the amount that you're going to get from now on, and your payment term is now, instead of 2 or 3 years, going to be 5 years, for instance. They have the opportunity then to come back to us and say, no, we're not happy with this or happy with that. And then we work with that repayment plan until everybody's happy. We then approach the court and make that an order of court. Now, what is very important to realize is that it's very, very important to get a reputable debt counselor. And the reason for that is because there's so much negotiation going on between the debt counselor and the credit providers. It helps a lot if you have a good relationship with the credit providers as a debt counselor. Now, for instance, if a certain debt counselor get a proposal from, example, Debt Rescue, then they would know that, okay, we know that these people are reasonable. They would not help consumers just taking chances and buy a Ferrari, so to speak, and then just pay off R1 a month for it, on that agreement. So they would know that this would be a reasonable offer, and that's why most of these offers would go through. Then, for instance, if you work with a debt counselor who doesn't have a good reputation, then when that lands with the credit providers, they would immediately know that there's red lights. They might not be happy with the proposal and scrutinize that, and in all probability oppose that in court. That's why that's also very important to get a reputable debt counselor. And yes, then we approach the court on your behalf. You don't have to go to court. We do that on your behalf. The debt counselor do that. We obtain the court order, and you pay off your debt in line and in terms of that court order.
Yeah, and I think it also boils down to having a negotiation power. I mean, the more kind of, the bigger you are, the more reputable your company is. If you have a good brand out there, I think it's much more easier for you to negotiate better terms with a credit provider than it would be for somebody who's maybe not, who's got like a bad name, or even for an individual to go and try to negotiate better terms.
Yeah, that's very true. You've got better negotiation power because you've got the relationship with those credit providers. There's thousands of their clients with you under debt review, so they need to look after the relationship with us as well. So yes, that makes a huge difference. And what we saw now during COVID is that the COVID and this whole lockdown and the pandemic has been a catalyst for a lot of things. And I think in debt counseling as well, in the sense that it was always inevitable, like with every new industry, that all the bigger players would eventually absorb most of the clients, and the smaller players in the market would become irrelevant for the reasons that you have pointed out now as well. And I think COVID and the lockdown has just expedited that. And we're now at the point where, especially with the new people applying for debt, under the new kind of client, the higher income clients, all kinds of professional people who did not necessarily struggle before and who's struggling now, they go to the reputable debt counselors, because that's the only way that you would know that you're actually going to get the professional services that you're paying for.
No, absolutely. I think, Neil, you have pointed out a couple of advantages and benefits already, but maybe you can just summarize for us again, like what's the pros and the cons of a debt review process?
Well, I think the pros is, firstly, you're placed in a situation where you are going to be relieved of all this financial pressure. And the financial pressure is just tremendous on people out there. We've seen that, and the people taking up antidepressants has increased tremendously during this times, and it's mostly because of the financial pressure that they experiencing. So yes, people are getting that relief. That's one of the major benefits. Then also it's convenient in the sense that you are now going to pay back your credit providers through your debt counselor and through this new payment plan, and that's one payment going off each month. It's not paying all your credit providers and dealing with all your credit providers. So it's just one payment a month. So it's very convenient. And then also the third point that's very important is the protection that you're getting from the Act, because there's a lot of people, and especially in the past, before the implementation of debt counseling, where they were bullied by credit providers because these people did not have enough money to approach an attorney and get representation in this regard. So the playing field was not level, but now it's been leveled with debt counselors, because remember, when you appoint a debt counselor, you don't pay them in advance with money out of your pocket. All the fees are included in your repayment plan. So there's no upfront fees or anything like that needs to be paid. So now each and everybody with an income can afford somebody to represent them. And that's the brilliance about this whole process. And then also, yeah, I think to add to debt counseling in South Africa, we've got brilliant legislation in South Africa with regard to debt counseling. In fact, there's a lot of first world countries approaching us in South Africa to try and learn from this process. And South Africa is actually the only country in the world where you can place your home loan under debt review. And I mean, that's tremendous, and people must make use of that.
No, absolutely. And I think if you think about it, many years ago, there was a huge concern in terms of the costs involved, and that sometimes the fees were so exorbitant that it almost put people in a worse position trying to follow this route. And then obviously things change with all the legislation, and I think you've touched now on the costs, but maybe you can also just explain a little bit more to us in terms of how are those costs involved calculated. Is it kind of like in a fixed fee that's brought in, or is it kind of like in a percentage of the total amount outstanding, or what's the basis of the costs and the fees involved?
Well, you're 100% right. There were a lot of talks about whether this is going to leave you in a financially worse situation than not approaching a debt counselor. But the reality is, since the inception of the Act and the implementation of debt counseling, the fees were always regulated by the National Credit Regulator. But I think that's where the reputation of reputable companies comes in, and where that's so important, because a lot of people did not stick to those regulations. And that's where these things came in. But nowadays, and especially with the more reputable debt counselors, there's no way that people would not adhere to those fee guidelines. And what those fee guidelines entail is that you pay as a client. There's a restructuring fee that needs to be paid. There's also an aftercare fee that needs to be paid, and then a legal fee because we have to get a court order. But all of these fees are included in your repayment plan. In other words, once you apply for debt review, if you apply for debt review this month, and let's say, for instance, usually you would have paid your credit providers 10,000 Rand a month. From this month, immediately you would only pay, let's say, for instance, half. That's 5,000 Rand a month. And all your fees would come out of that 5,000 Rand. So you're not paying additional fees. Now, how these fees are calculated is that your restructuring fee would be the amount that's payable towards your credit providers on a monthly basis, but that will be capped at 8,000 Rand for a single application, or 9,000 Rand with a joint application. Then the legal fee, because we have to get this through court, that's also paid off and included in your repayment plan. And that varies between about 5,000 and 8,400 Rand, depending on how big your debt is, and also how much you are going to repay your credit providers. And then there's the last fee, and that's the aftercare fee, and that's an amount of 5% of the amount paid towards your credit providers on a monthly basis, but that's also capped at 450 Rand, so it can never be more than 450 Rand. And what you get for that is actually amazing. You know, all our work is on a digital basis and soft copy, and you know, but before that, and years ago, when we worked with hard copy files, you know, each client had a file, and you would be amazed to see how much work goes into one client's debt review. Sometimes we would really see a file that's so thick, because what it entails, the work from our side, is that we have to negotiate and communicate with each and every one of your credit providers. And sometimes we have people with more than 20 credit providers. We have people sometimes with 12 credit cards. It's amazing, but that's the reality. And then there has to be communicated with these individuals on a regular, or the credit providers on a regular basis, and also with the individuals, and then also with the attorneys, and court dates needs to be obtained, court documents needs to be drafted, it needs to be signed. Then there needs to be, this needs to be served on the various credit providers. So there's a lot of work going in here. And the fact that you do not have to pay money up front, or that all the money is included in your repayment plan, is brilliant, because that enables each and every person in South Africa who earns an income to make use of this process called debt counselling.
No, I think that's absolutely, definitely one of the biggest advantages of this process, because I think then nobody can say they can't afford to do that, because they can, in the way that it is set up and structured now. But if I think about your credit record, how would your debt review process also impact on your credit record?
So when you are placed under debt review, we would notify the credit bureaus of the fact that you have now been placed under debt review. A flag is then placed behind your name, indicating that you are under debt review. And the reason for that is that whilst you are under debt review, you're not allowed to get any further credit apart from a consolidation loan. But you're not allowed to get any other credit. But I think, I mean, that makes sense, because we're trying to get you out of debt. And if you, in order to get you out of debt, you cannot obtain more debt during that time. So it makes sense. But then when you reach a point where we provide you with a clearance certificate, and that is at the stage where you have either paid off all your credit providers, or you have paid off all your unsecured debt, like your personal loans, or store cards or credit cards. If you've paid off all of that and you only have your home loan outstanding, and that is paid up to date, then we can also give you a clearance certificate and get you out of debt review. And then that flag will be removed from your name, and there would be no proof or indication that you have been under debt review ever.
Okay. And then about how would it impact on your employment or applying for a new job? Would it have an impact, or can it happen that now a company let you go because they kind of hear you are under debt review, or how does that process work?
Well, let's start off with that point. Can a company let you go because of the fact that you are under debt review? If that ever happens, I think you would have 1,000 attorneys taking on your case for free, because that can never happen. They can never be discriminated against you because of the fact that you are under debt review. But that being said, your employer do not even know that you're under debt review. This is not a payroll deduction. It's not a matter of the debt counselor contacting your employer and informing them of the fact that you're under debt review and deducting money from your income. It doesn't work that way. You are just signing a debit order, and that's the way you pay for the debt counselling, or rather this new repayment plan of yours. So your employer would never know that you're under debt review. And then with regards to applying for a new position, yes, there might be positions like, for instance, a financial manager or chartered accountant at some firms, or they might say that they would not want to employ people who have been under debt review. I think it's unlikely, but it might be the case. But in most cases, and almost all cases, employers in our experience do not discriminate against you for being or having been under debt review. And in fact, what that normally shows is that you are a person doing the responsible thing when you need to. So if I, for instance, employ people, I've employed lots of people who've been under debt review, because what it tells me is that, yes, they've been struggling financially, like more than 50% of all credit active consumers in South Africa, but they have done the responsible thing by going under debt review and making sure that they're paying back their credit providers, but in a way that is sustainable. And also in terms of legislation.
No, I think that is a very good point you are making there. But I think if you think about the debt review process, and now you are working out repayment plans, and all of that is taking or assuming that the person earns an income to be able to repay that new installment. But what happens now if somebody is retrenched, or their income has been impacted now, especially during this lockdown period, and they are no longer earning an income? What's the options, or is there an alternative? Can debt review still work under those circumstances?
Well, that's a very good question, because so many people have lost their jobs during this time. So if you do not have any income whatsoever, you cannot be placed under debt review, because we are actually independent functionaries of court, making sure that we act in the best interest of the consumers and the credit providers alike. But so we would need some form of income to use to pay some back at least a portion of the monthly installments towards the credit providers. But now, if you have the one person have lost their job, but their spouse have not lost their job, and in that household there is still an income, we can still place the person under debt review, or both these people under debt review, because there's going to be one form of income that's basically going to be shared between those two, and be used to pay off their credit providers. So in that sense, we can still place you under debt review. But if you don't have a spouse or anybody else in the household, or anybody that can contribute a monthly sum of money in order to place you under debt review, the only other alternative then is voluntary sequestration. And basically what that means is that if you are sequestrated, all your debt is written off. So there's various ways of doing that. If you have a house at that stage, or a home loan, that house can be used to pay off a certain amount of your credit providers, and that would normally be enough. If that's not the case, then if you do not have a house, then you can do a cash sequestration, or just pay off a certain amount, so that there's still a benefit for the credit providers, because that's one of the requirements for being sequestrated on a voluntary basis, is that there must be benefit to the credit provider. So usually that is around 20% or 20 cents in a rand. So what it means is that you would probably then just only pay back 20% of all your debt on a monthly basis, the amount that you can afford, and that's it. And then your debt is written off.
Okay. And then you've mentioned now with a debt review process, when you go out of the process, the flags on your credit record will be removed. You can get the clearance certificate. But are there any other consequences following a debt review process for future purposes that you need to take into account?
The only other possible thing that might come up in any negative way for having been placed under debt review at some point in your life is that you might, at certain financial institutions, when you apply for a loan, one of the questions on that loan application might be that, or whether you have been under debt review, and if so, when did you receive your clearance certificate? And what the banks would then generally do is that if you've been placed under debt review, it all depends on the banks, obviously, with their criteria, but you would get banks that would be willing to give you a loan immediately after you've been cleared from debt review and received your clearance certificate. Or you would get banks that would say, all right, let's wait 6 months or a year before we give this individual a loan, and see whether they would be able to stand on their own 2 feet now. So that's the only possible thing that might hinder you in the future. And also, like I said, you might get an employer in certain positions who might ask you that. But, well, personally, I've never asked that to anybody. I have picked up that some people are on the debt review, others not, but that should not play a role in employing somebody, especially after COVID and lockdown, because if that's the case, you're going to find it extremely hard to get somebody to employ somebody who have not received some kind of assistance in this financial crisis that we're going through.
No, I totally agree with you. But we have said now during this discussion, mentioned there are a lot of scammers out there, and usually during these kind of financially kind of difficult periods, you always see there's an increase in scams out there. But what are the things that people should look out for when they want to approach somebody or a debt counseling company to make sure that it is a reputable and a legitimate company that they are dealing with?
Well, the first thing that you have to determine is whether this particular company is registered with the National Credit Regulator. And you can do that by going onto the website of the National Credit Regulator. You can just Google National Credit Regulator. I think the website is ncr.org or something like that. And then you can type in the name of the debt counselor, the actual individual. And remember, with debt counseling, it's individuals who are registered as debt counselors, not companies. So it's important that you get the name of that individual, type that into the relevant box on the website, and you will find a registration for that person, or it would indicate that the person is not registered. You can also type in the company name, and it will show you all the relevant or the registered debt counselors under that company. So that's very important to do. And then the other thing is, I would recommend if talking to your bank, and ask your bank who they would recommend in this regard, because at the end of the day, the banks are working with all the bigger debt counselors, and they would know, or with all the debt counselors for that matter, but they are the people who would be able to tell you who are reputable and who are not. And so that might be a good place to start.
Okay. And then, Neil, the last question I want to ask, and that's maybe a bit of an unfair question to ask to you, because if nobody's got any debt, then you no longer have a job, but you deal with this kind of every day. What tips would you give to people out there to avoid debt or to manage their debt a lot better, so that they don't even end up being in a situation where they need people like you?
Well, just to start off by saying that, we like helping people and getting people out of debt. So, and debt will always be part of our lives. So we definitely do not want people to become over indebted. And I think we've made that very clear and very public during the last 10 years or so. And especially when we see the credit providers approaching debt or consumers out there and enticing them to take up debt. We hate that, because it's that kind of conduct that forces people into a debt trap that they cannot get out of. But the tips that we would give is to make sure, firstly, that you have a written budget. Always, that's the most important thing. It must be a realistic budget, and you have to stick to that budget. But then part of that budget must be an emergency fund, because we've seen in the past that people have button, a budget, and they try to stick with that budget, but then life happens. Their car breaks down, or a family member has to go to hospital and they do not have the necessary funds or medical aid, or somebody passes away. And then all of a sudden that whole budget falls apart, because then there's money that needs to be paid that we're not budgeted for. So it's very important to have that emergency fund ready as well. Then, yes, we do not have financial education in South Africa, but nothing prevents you from doing your own education and research online and buy books. There's one book that I've also read, and I recommend that to people. It's Total Money Makeover, and I think it's Dave Ramsey, the Total Money Makeover. And in that book, he actually encourages people and show you how to become totally debt free, because that's the way that you would want to live. And we've become so used to debt, especially in South Africa, that we feel that there's no way of going through life without debt. Yes, sure, it's very difficult to start off without debt, because you need a car, you need to probably have a study loan, or these kind of things. But then it doesn't mean that you have to be in debt the rest of your life. So try and get out of debt. So it's drop that budget, stick to that budget, and also know your rights. And that's very important, because if you do find yourself in a situation where you are, for instance, over indebted, or you have debt that is prescribed or anything like that, then you must know your rights in that regard. So just go and read up on that.
Neil, thank you so much for joining me today. I believe this is such a relevant topic, especially during this time. And it is so important that people know kind of what is available. I always say that no matter what your situation is, or how dark and difficult it might seem for you, there is always help out there, and you just need to find it, and you need to make that decision and take action to look for help and to improve your situation. So I am going to share your website details so that people can get in touch with you if they need it. But I definitely want to thank you for spending some time with us. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom. And I can only hope that people can apply these tips, and that it can help them to manage their debt a lot better. So I want to thank you all for watching this video. I hope you have enjoyed it. Please subscribe, please comment, ask some questions. We will be more than happy to help you out with your questions. And then it's up until the next time when we are doing our next Ronel Talks Money show. Thank you and goodbye.